very much, Bruno, and all the organizers of this conference. Thank you very much for inviting Gustafson Porter here to talk about our work. I wanted to frame the work within this context of water and no water. So I'll talk briefly about two of the projects we've been working on in the last few years. One is in Singapore, where obviously there's a lot of water, and the other is in Abu Dhabi, where there's not very much water at all, and look at how those two contexts and the availability of water affects the landscape. And then I'll talk briefly about some of our other projects and how we've used water in the past for just for effect, really, and for delight, and for creating different environments, because we use water quite a lot within our work. And then I'd like to conclude with a current project that we're working on at the moment, which is the Valencia Parque Central in Valencia, Spain, which is a new project that we won in competition earlier this year and have been developing since then. So water, no water, these two different contexts. The one on the left-hand side is Singapore, inside the Botanic Garden of Singapore, and the other is in Meziad in Alain, which is about 2 hours outside of Abu Dhabi. And I guess the presence or the lack of water really defines what one can do in the landscape. It defines everything. It defines the color and the atmosphere and the character of space that one can create. So within these two contexts, I think even in the color palette you can see the blue sky and the sandy colors and the lack of water and the type of planting that comes out of that, and then the very lush green landscapes of the tropical landscape. So to figure out how this pointer works. So this is Singapore, and you can see this is a map of 1970 Singapore. Singapore is a very small island at the tip of Malaysia, and its landmass is defined by the island, and so they have progressively over the years been reclaiming land from the sea. And you can see in this this picture of today, this was the edge that's shown here. So what they've been doing is progressively landfilling, reclaiming land, and then creating whole new parts of the city. This is Marina Bay, which is now the sort of the downtown center of Singapore. Then there's a new Sands Hotel that's just gone up here. I don't know if you've seen it. Very iconic building, the new wheel here. And we won this competition in 2006 to design Marina East. And Andrew Grant wanted to design this part of the park, Marina South. And it's a fantastic project, and it's nearing completion. So if you ever get the chance to get Grant Associates to talk about it, it's really an interesting project. So on this side, you can see that is the area of the park. It was completely underwater, and in order for us to create a sort of a stable ground in a very unstable context, the whole area has been solidified really by creating a system of wick drains. So the land is still settling. It will continue to settle for many years. And in order to draw the water up out of the ground, there are a series of wick drains that go into the ground, bored down at sort of 1 or 2 meter centers, which allow the water to be sucked out of the ground, and then the ground can compact much more quickly. And that was very important for us because our scheme, as you will see, is very much integrated with the landscape. So it's very easy to pile buildings and create some kind of a solid base in this very wet ground, but for landscapes you also need to do that if they've got this very high degree of interface between the building and the landscape. So this is a view of Singapore looking out over the bay, and our site is on this side. This is now a freshwater reservoir, and that is the sea. So about 3 or 4 years ago, this barrage was completed, and that's meant that all of this water, which originally was salt water, is slowly becoming sweet water, fresh water. And that has now become a reservoir, because Singapore actually has a problem with fresh water, drinking water. They import a lot of their water from the mainland, from Malaysia, and obviously they would like to be self-sufficient. So they've been creating these reservoirs around the edge of the island, and that's done by sealing off the seawater here. And as it rains, a lot of salt water goes to the bottom, and then it's flushed out into the sea. So this has now become a freshwater reservoir. And around this reservoir, then, there are these 3 parks, and those parks really become the heart of a new development on that landfill site. So this whole area is now being developed, and we've recently won a project to develop a garden within one of these buildings. And then this is a golf course which has a 30-year lease running on it, but it will eventually become another very important development area within Singapore, with this Marina Bay and its gardens as the heart of it. So it's really about how landscape can become a catalyst for development, increasing land values, making much more pleasant place for people to be, and creating residential and amenity areas for a city. This is the view back to the downtown Singapore from Marina East. And when we first started working on the competition, we were very much inspired by these big tropical leaf shapes. They're very strong and striking and architectural, and also obviously by the color and the flora and fauna that one finds there. And what we were trying to do is to create a welcoming environment to really draw people outside. Singapore is very hot and very humid. The temperature is relatively constant, around 32 degrees, but the humidity is very high, and it means that when you go outside for a walk, you can really walk comfortably for maybe a quarter of a kilometer or so before you start to get hot and sweaty, and if you're going to a meeting or something, you don't want to show up completely sweaty. And so most people end up using the underground, very used to living and working in air-conditioned spaces. And one of the challenges was to actually draw people out into a landscape that people would use and be able to use comfortably. So how does one create the climatic conditions within an external landscape to make that happen? Obviously, sun and ray protection is very important, and the ambition to create a sort of pedestrian comfort levels. So it was very much about the body and what makes the body comfortable. How do you create enough shade and the conditions to allow the body to have to be comfortable in that environment? The other thing we wanted to do was really to engage with the water, because Singapore is obviously an island on the sea. Flooding and the control of flooding is a very important issue, which means that a lot of the edges are quite high, so that they're elevated above the flood levels. And we wanted to try and design a park where you could start to break down those levels and engage directly with the water, but do it in a very safe manner. The other important environmental condition is the wind, because if it's very stagnant, it obviously feels hotter and muggier than if you can get some breeze into the site. And so the design started to develop around the creation of these different inlets, which we cut deep into the site, because we noticed when you walk along this edge, you get lovely breezes off of Marina Bay. But when we were back in the heart of the site, it became very stagnant. So by cutting these inlets in, it meant that we were drawing the breezes through deep into the site and creating a much more pleasant environment. So this is the overall master plan. The site is about 2 kilometers long. It varies in width between 150 and 200 meters. And you can see the inlets that are being created here in order to draw the breezes in. And each one of those inlets becomes a very important water feature that then has a different programmatic use. The one at the top is a boating area. This whole site was the part of the first Youth Olympics in 2010. So last summer they hosted a lot of the boating events on Marina Bay. And boating will become an important activity within the park. So there's a boathouse that's located at this point, along with the visitor center, which will greet guests, and then you make your way through the park. The next big inlet is where there's a big water feature, which is seen from across the bay, and around that water feature are a series of restaurants and cafes which should draw people through the park. So we're always trying to create activities that will progressively draw people through this very long linear site. The connection back to the city was also very important, and we've since proposed a pedestrian bridge in this area, because this whole residential area isn't built yet. It's not very well served by public transport. So a lot of our work was in trying to get the connections through to where the existing metro stations are on the central area and the southern area. And the important thing about our client for this project is the National Parks Board of Singapore. And the fantastic thing in Singapore is that the idea of the city within the garden and the garden within the city is all part of their brand. It's what makes Singapore Singapore. And the National Parks Board sits at a sort of equal level with all the other agencies, the Development Agency, the Transport Agency, the Public Utilities Board. And so whenever there's a development, each development has to take into account the landscape, and it's a very important part. And recently there's been a whole other development, which is that for every square meter of development area that a building takes in its footprint must be replaced by an equivalent amount of landscape areas. So either by courtyards or roof gardens or using every available bit of land, you need to replace that equivalent amount of area with a landscaped area, which is an amazing thing for a city doing. So this is the model of the scheme. We quite often work with three-dimensional models. This is a RIBA model that we've developed, so we can manipulate these forms in 3D, and we can then create models from that by CNC techniques. It's all programmed then into computer, and it can cut the model, and we can look at it in 3 dimensions. But this is showing those various inlets that then all become key water features within the scheme. And in this image, you can start to see the large leaf forms that are defining the different garden spaces. So this is at the top of the park. You can see this is the main East Coast Parkway bridge that connects the eastern bit of the island to the central downtown core. It's a very high bridge. That bridge allows large ships to get underneath it, so it's got really high draft. I can't remember how high up it is, about 20 meters or so, and which made it very difficult for pedestrians to cross over with ease, because one of the brief requirements for this park was that it could take the marathon, which they run at night. But we didn't want this to be any more than 5% slope, so that it could be accessible for everybody, which meant bringing the bridge down quite low and then designing a bridge that would be able to spin open for when large ships would come through and go up into the Kallang Basin. So this is the entry sequence. This is the visitor center, and all the buildings within the park have been tucked in and integrated with the landscape. And we work together with a group of landscape architects, but we really design and define the form of the building. Our office is not quite 50% architects, but we have a lot of architects in the office, so we will quite often take on the concept designs of buildings whenever they're serving a landscape. And in this first leaf, you can also see this area, which is the water leak, which is actually treating the water. So we had a lot of discussions with the Public Utilities Board, who control the waterways, to work on a strategy whereby we could take water from the Marina Bay, which is sweet water, and then we pump it up into our garden, and that's then filtrated through a series of aquatic plants and weirs in this leaf. And then we can draw off that water for our own irrigation needs and for the main water features. And then that water gets treated and pumped back into the reservoir, so it becomes an open system, and that helps the reservoir to keep oxygenated and to not grow algal blooms when the weather gets too hot. So that was quite a good symbiotic relationship between our garden and the wider water strategy for Singapore. It's an aerial view that shows that entry piece, the pedestrian bridge, the visitor center, and this aquatic garden. The next leaf is a big color display garden. And then you have a series of paths that come down to the water edge. And you can see how we were really trying to break down the edge so that people can get right down to the water. The boathouse, as we developed the plan, ended up on the northern side of the bridge. So it's up in this area, and then you have a slipway that allows boats to get down into the Marina Bay. And you can see here in the cross section, all of the levels are really being defined by the flood levels of the bay. At the lower level, you have the normal water level. Then the first pedestrian level is set just above the normal flood level. So in the event of flood, people can move up to the next level, which is then set at the 100-year level. But all the buildings are actually set up at a level that's above the maximum flood levels. It's a view of the visitor center, so people arriving at the park would come and get information, maybe look at an exhibition before they're drawn into the park to see the different activities and gardens. This is a view of, again, the visitor center, where we have at the top of it, we also have an area where people can stand and watch the boat races. The building is completely open in the sense that you can move through it. There's a central courtyard that then has views out to the water, and we were always very conscious of this, the connection between the park and the water and framing views of the water. The view of the second leaf, the aquatic garden, and its reed beds. So you can see there's a series of terraces that are moving downhill in this direction toward the water. And then as it engages with the visitor center at this edge, the leaf is sort of gently pulled up, and there are a series of terraces that then create a water feature at the entrance where you can hear the water and you're drawn toward the park to move through it. And a view of those water terrace gardens as you're moving through. They will be filled with aquatic planting, and the water is actually being filtered through a series of gravel beds that are in the lower layers. Color garden. The color garden was meant to be a garden, one of the gardens that can change constantly. So you might have different flower displays that would change in color and feel throughout the year, and that is located near the entrance because we felt there are a lot of tourists and people coming who would come just to get that picture at the visitor center and then get back on the bus and move on to their next experience. We had a funny time with trying to understand the brief for parks and how Singaporeans really, what is their life, what is their lifestyle, and they kept talking about this thing, lifestyle. We want lifestyle. And I said, well, what is lifestyle? Lifestyle is how you live every day. And he said, no, lifestyle as a kind of, which we then sort of slowly understood as lifestyle is being able to go to restaurants and food and beverage units and that sort of activity, but it took us a long time to understand this concept of lifestyle. So, yes, the view of the colour gardens, and in these sections you can see how the ground is pretty much completely flat. So we really wanted to create an elevated landscape, because if you get a little bit above the water, then you start to get the breezes that are coming through, and you also get the fantastic views of the skyline and the views of the water. So the entire ground has been sculpted and molded in a way to allow you to have a series of different spaces at different heights, and those are all, the forms of those are all these giant leaf shapes. And underneath the leaf shapes is car parking, are the restaurants. The front end of this will be a restaurant unit, the back end is the underground car park, and above that will be a planted garden. So again, this is a view of how one of the buildings is integrated into the landscape. So it's all, green facades and gardens on top of each of the buildings. So you really just get this slit of glass for the cafes and restaurants. This is the food garden. So in this leaf we have a series of allotment gardens that can be either run by the restaurant in this area, or can become a community garden or an educational garden. But the idea was that we introduce the fruits and spices and things that are grown locally, and that those can then be used within the restaurant as an attraction. This is the big water feature here, which has giant jets, and then around that are these the restaurants and gardens, which are tucked underneath these leaves. So a picture of the food gardens. And again, one of the restaurants with the bridge in the background. You see how we tried to lower this edge, and then in the event of any flooding, the flood levels come up to this level, and people will be safe and secure. Again, we tend to work a lot with water features, and we can create these different effects not only by how we actually sculpt the stone and create different effects just by gravity and water running over it, or by jets. This big water feature has a plant room underneath it, which is collecting the water from the site, filtrating it, purifying it, and then using it within the garden water features. Again, a 3D view, and how we sort of create this sculpted edge. So this is an edge that allows you to get down to this water feature, which can be drained down and used for big events. And so these sides can be used as sort of informal amphitheater seating area on the sides here. And then the relationship of the restaurant to the main water features. And a view of that big water feature at night. And then you can see from each face, you're always being drawn through and into the next space by the next activity. The next leaf is palm garden, so that will be a garden which will be a botanical display of all the different palm types, leaf shapes. And then this is another aquatic garden, which really takes its form from rice paddies. Again, a picture of the cafe. And then the aquatic terraces. So again, very sculpted leaf form, which will be planted not with rice, but with different aquatic grasses and that kind of thing. So each leaf has a very specific character. Then the next area is we call the Romantic Valley. So that's a very long linear water inlet, which is meant to be quite intimate space where people could have weddings and that kind of thing. So again, very lush, very dense planting, very intimate feel. But again, with the sort of, sorry. with this very sculpted edge. So always there, within this natural world, there's always this very integrated, man-made, designed hand. The aim of the gardens is that they become destination gardens. So it's a type of place that people would come, not only tourists but also local residents will find spaces that they can use for family events, for big wedding parties like this one, for outdoor gatherings. Then the next leaf, the Fragrant Night Garden, all about smell and color. And each space has a very different sensual quality. This last one, the Amphitheater and Lifestyle Center. Again, the Lifestyle Center is a place which might have a swimming pool. This is a big wave pool. It has a spa in this area. So it's all about the body and how the body literally and physically engages with the water. And then this is a high-level bridge and a waterfall with a restaurant and bar tucked behind it in this area. So that's the spa building. This is the wave pool, so that's the place where people can actually swim. They didn't want to allow swimming in this area because it's a boating channel, so they wanted to preserve that for small boats and the larger yachts that are coming through. But we did then create a swimming area so people could actually engage with the water. And in this section, you can see how we're creating these sort of quite extreme level changes from what is a relatively flat site. This is the bar and restaurant that's tucked behind this the waterfall. And then at the tip of the island, where we start to meet the sea again, is a building which has yet to be defined, but it could be a cultural building, it could be a convention center, but it's quite a large footprint of a building that, again, is like a big leaf shape that tilts up and faces the water. And then creating an amphitheater space where people can gather for outdoor events. And then finally, at the tip of the peninsula is this is a boat lock. So this is the way they get bigger ships from the sea into the Marina Bay. They come into this into the boat lock and get lifted into this area. And this channel is a more natural channel. That is a channel. Originally, they just had this sort of piped connection in coming across our park to service the drainage water from this future residential neighborhood. So we built that into the design, and this is actually a stormwater drainage system that comes through here, and that has a much more naturalistic feel. But you can see here that is normally filled with water, and then in a storm water condition, it gets filled up to here. And then finally, the tip of the island. So this is seawater. This is fresh water, and then you get to the end and look out over the sea. So this is our site currently, and you can see the adjacent golf course, and this is Marina South. This photo was taken a couple of years ago now. So this is Andrew Grant's scheme on this side, which is now largely built. They're just working on the planting now, but most of the main structures for the big greenhouses are in. And then you see the barrage building, so the division between Sweetwater and seawater. Then I wanted to take you to a very, very different place. This is Meziad Desert Park in the UAE, in the United Arab Emirates. And it's meant to be their first national desert park. Our client is ADAC, which is the Abu Dhabi Authority for Culture and Heritage. And this region has just been awarded UNESCO, WHO status as a World Heritage site. So hopefully they will move forward with the project. It's an incredible site. This is a desert gravel plain with this mountain that rises out of the plain. And along the base of the mountain are many Bronze Age tombs from nomadic peoples traveling along, it's actually on this side, in the shadow of the mountain, mostly at night, but also late afternoon is when they would, move. And there are quite a few tomb sites, important tomb sites, as well as all the natural sites of the wadis that are created as the water comes off the mountain. So this is the mountain range. The site is 4 kilometers long by 1 kilometer deep, so 40,000 hectare site. This is the existing town of Meziad, and they've built, over the years they've allowed camels and goats to graze this land, and they have completely eaten up all the planting. And so what's happening is that when it does rain, and it doesn't rain very often, but when it does rain, it just sheets off the mountain, and you can see the wadi courses here. But it was flooding this adjacent town, and they built a sandbank up against the road, which you can see in this area, and planted a plantation band of trees in here to try and stop the flow of water from flooding this town. And our project is really trying to recreate that natural desert environment. This is the border with Oman, and on the Oman side, which hasn't been overgrazed by the animals that have been penned in there, you can see what the natural vegetation looks like. And the ambition really is to replant this desert back to its natural ecology. So you can see in this aerial photo from 1965 how the natural water courses are running and what the natural vegetation would have looked like. So by studying these old photographs and working together with Kew, the Royal Botanic Garden at Kew, we've tried to understand what the vegetation model would be and how one then starts to recreate that vegetation model. So there were surveys that were done of what the trees are in the different areas, from the upper wadi to the gravel plain, and then the lower wadi and the alluvial fan. And they've studied the different types and what is growing with what, and how different clusters of plants are growing in the shade of the acacia trees, and surveyed all of that to create the new vegetation model. And they've also Kew have collected seeds from the site so that we can create a native seed bank. The idea was to replant it only with native, but true native actually from this site rather than from any other site around Tallinn or the region. So collecting the seeds on site and storing them in a seed bank and then propagating them on site. And it was a real chore with numbers, trying to imagine how many seeds and how many plants one would have to grow to repropagate a desert of this size. And it's enormous, and there's a huge failure rate because of the lack of water and the intense sun. A lot of the plants will die, so the failure rate on the plants was estimated to be about 60%. So having to really grow and plan out the repopulation of the desert over a fairly long 10-year period of time. So this was a survey that was done of the plant distribution in an area called the fenced corner, but that was an area that was fenced, so that it wasn't eaten away by the camels and goats. So there we were able to see more or less what the native distribution of plants would have been, and then try and recreate that in a framework. For this, in this case, it's a 10 by 10 meter framework, and then apply that across the site. And we were really concentrating on very specific areas because obviously it's a huge area to be able to repopulate, but looking at how we start to jumpstart the whole process by locating these, the initial tree planting and smaller shrub planting in areas along the wadi where they are likely to get water in the event of rain, and strategically where can we place the plants. We then did a series of tests out in the desert. We started to do some tree transplants to see whether or not we could transplant trees from the plantation band into different areas, so that would help to kickstart this whole process by creating the shade that would then create the protection for the younger seedlings. So this was the project to design a nursery. So there's a nursery building, which is a controlled building. It's air-conditioned building to control the conditions within it. And then there's a big shade house outside of the building. And as the seeds get to be a certain height in the plants, they get moved out to be hardened off under a shade cover. And as they progressively grow, then they get taken out and exposed to more and more sun and more heat until they're acclimatized and can be moved out into the field. So there's some images of what we're trying to achieve, and this is a partial image of the overall site. But you can see this is the what we call the entrance landscape off of the main road between Mezyad and the Oman border, and that little speck there is the visitor center. And then we developed a series of trails defining how people and small vehicles might be able to move across this terrain. The land has been disturbed not only by the goats and camels, but also by heavy trucks and vehicles during the exploration for oil in the 70s and 80s. So there's a lot of compacted tracks and trails across here. So we need to ensure that we very carefully plan the vehicular routes and the pedestrian routes as we're doing this very careful desert restoration project. So within the wider park, there will be a series of satellite buildings where people can go out, where they can get water to drink and maybe a map to orientate themselves, and then they can trek out and visit, in this case, the natural feature, which is this white wadi that comes off of the mountain, and in this case, the tombs, the Bronze Age tombs. And in this satellite, they can come and visit the nursery satellite and the nursery project for the repropagation. And then in the visitor center, there's a much bigger display area that talks about the wider site, the flora and fauna, the archaeological remains, and so on. So again, this is a view of one of the little satellite buildings that people have come out to. We're, trying to disturb the land as little as possible. They're fairly modest structures, but we need to provide toilets. You need to provide a first aid room for people that come out here because it's very hot, and some people might not be able to tolerate the weather. And trying to do that in a sensitive way as possible using local materials. All water in this case is tankered in because there is no water, so there are holding tanks, dry flush toilets, that kind of thing, to support the visitor experience. And then this is an image of that little tiny speck, which is actually quite a large building. The initial plan of visitor centers. So this is under a big roof, so that people can gather outside, but under shade cover, before moving into these individual building pods that hold different functions. So this is a reception area and a shop. This is a visitor center with an area where you can go and see an orientation film, education rooms for classrooms. It's a big model of the site, so people coming to the site can first orientate themselves around a model with complete view of the desert before them, so that they can very clearly orientate themselves as to where to go. It's a cafe, restaurant building, and the main exhibition pod. So again, we're very mindful of how one preserves views through and out into the desert, because that is really the experience. We didn't want the building itself to be the attraction, but really it's the view and it's the desire to move out into this landscape that was important. And we did that by locating the building actually on the sand bund, so that what you're seeing of the building is minimized and basically buried within the existing sand bund, which is this flood protection between the desert and the city. And then creating this big roof that would create shade cover so that many people could gather there and be in an external environment, and only air condition the areas that we needed to air condition. This is a view from the desert side of the restaurant building and the education building, and then people would come out after the orientation, move on to electric vehicles, and then move out to the site. And a plan of the building, and a view from. So this is the big orientation model, and as you can see, there are big views. So as you're within the visitor center, you can look out, orientate yourself, and then move out into the desert landscape. And of course, we're working very much with the local natural materials, and that works its way through the color scheme and palette for the visitor center. How can you create and bring something to the visitor center in a very contemporary way, but looking at the historic textures and artifacts and the way that things have been created over time. So it's really trying to draw from their culture and their history to create their new national park. And then I wanted to talk about just quickly about a project that's obviously you've probably all seen, the Diana Memorial in London. But in this case, it's really about how one creates these various water effects. And as you probably all know, we were trying to use these water effects to symbolize different aspects of Diana's personality. So, at the top of it, there's the water source, and then this is a sort of water stream and love of nature. This area we call the champagne bubbles, quite bubbly. The water is a bit more active before it falls into this more tranquil pool. On this side, we have a series of steps and flowing forms that are a bit like fabric, those are our love of fashion. This area is, we call it the rock and roll, where the water rocks and rolls, and then there's more energy that's sort of pumped into here, very lively, and then it comes again into the tranquil pool. But we did this by, most of the water feature is done using gravity. So it comes in at a high point, and the gravity is generated from the natural contours of the site. We were also very mindful that we're working in the context of a listed park landscape. And there was, within the brief, we had to work with the existing serpentine lake. And so the water for this water feature is actually being drawn out of the borehole that goes 80 meters in the ground, and that's located off to the left here. So it's all natural water, and it's untreated, it's not chemically treated water. And it's an open system with a serpentine. So we use the water, it goes back into a storage tank. 10% of the water gets flushed out into the serpentine, again to keep down the algal blooms. And then 90% of it is stored and topped up with 10% of it, and then recycled around the feature again. This is a plan view of that from the top. So this is the source area. So all the water is being pumped up into this high area, and then it falls gradually about 2.5, 3 meters drop from this point down to the tranquil pool at the bottom. And the other very interesting thing about the project was the work that we did to create all the textures, to create the various water features. Some of them used water jets to pump water in, but most of the features are created just by texturing the stone in different ways. And again, drawn from natural forms, from a mountain stream, and the sort of the rocks that jut up into that stream, and how that makes the water bounce and move, and more particularly the sound of the water that you get. So this was a process that we worked on with John Gould from Texas, and he had developed a sort of a software system for imaging, for taking two-dimensional imaging images and then projecting them into 3D, and then working out a way to be able to overlay that onto a digital file so that we could cut the stone. So the entire project was done without any drawings, with very few drawings. It was all done with digital files, and those digital files were then sent to the cutting machines in Northern Ireland, and it was all cut by computer. And just to show that you know, a lot of these features, some of it was guesswork, and we worked with Arabs to define the water quantities and basic flows, but a lot of the water effects you can't really anticipate, and so for some of them we did full-scale models to look at it. This is in Imperial College in their hydrology lab. This is actually a quarter-scale model of the rock and roll piece, but you know, we mocked it up full scale and tested it with our this is a professor at Imperial College. But to really send the water down, look at the effects, be able to adjust it before it was literally carved in stone. This was another part of the water feature that was done in another lab or a warehouse in Somerset to look at what we call the champagne bubbles. So how can we create these aerator bubbles? This air is being pumped in here, which is creating that water effect. So this is a full-size piece that was knocked up in wood to actually test that effect and test the equipment. And then some of the final images. So this is the image of the rock and roll. And that step feature, which is like this, the rolls of fabric. And the chadar, which is again a series of carved. I asked, you know, this it's a traditional Mughal feature, but I was asking Kathryn where she got the idea for this particular shape, and she said they were lips. Seem to have frozen. Don't know if it's out of battery, but it seems to have frozen. Was Bruno on? Oh, okay. So yes, then a view is, it's obviously become a very popular water feature in London. It gets up to 1 million visitors a year, very well loved, particularly in the hot season. And it was very interesting, you know, early on there were sheer problems with sort of crowd control, but it has sort of calmed down now. Originally they had guards there that wouldn't allow people to get in the water, and now they seem to be policing it a lot less, and it's being used very much in the way that we imagined, that people would be able to interact with the water feature, but in a very respectful way. And then just quickly, another water feature in the Treasury courtyards in London, in the government offices in Great George Street, where we did 2 different kinds of water features. This feature is over the top of the cabinet war room, so of course we had to be very careful with all the waterproofing and effects. But you know, how can one use water to create these different effects? And in this case, it's reflecting the listed building. The water feature can be, you know, used and enjoyed by people sitting out in the cafe, but it can also be drained down and used for parties and events. And in the other courtyard, a very different feel where we created this water rill. Again, the sound, background sound of water creates a very tranquil atmosphere. And in this courtyard is surrounded by a library, so people can go out and sort of quietly read a book and be in this very intimate setting. And then another water feature project, a garden in Swiss Cottage in London, where the water feature really becomes the heart. And again, of this. It's a community redevelopment project. This is a theatre. This is a sports centre, the library, and the residential building. So the park is really the thing that's holding those various buildings together. This is a five-a-side football pitch. The water feature again can be drained down and used as a staging area with the natural amphitheatre that surrounds it. Works together with the theatre. This is the theatre foyer is in this area. So as you come through, you get these big views of the sports centre and the park in between. And it's when it's not being used as a water feature for children to play in, it's drained down and kids end up playing football and rollerblading and roller skating in the base of the fountain. But again, very well used community park where water is the sort of animating feature. And then in a much more public space in Nottingham, a major water feature which becomes the big attractor in the square. And the wonderful thing about this square is that it's programmed almost 365 days a year. There is some event that's planned by the Nottingham City Council, from the big Ferris wheel to the Christmas fair to markets to all kinds of different displays. Really very well used and programmed with events throughout the year. I think it's stuck again. Bruno? Oh, tell me how much time I have.
Well, 5 minutes.
5 minutes, wow, okay, I'm going to whip through this then. This is a project in Beirut. Again, this is along the water theme. This is another landfill site, and we're doing a series of projects that mark where the old shoreline was, and this is all land that's being reclaimed from the sea. And this is a series of parks that we're doing. And I'm just going to, Bruno's going to tell me I have to go. I'll just go quickly to this. This is one of those squares that has just been completed this summer. It's very black and white, very graphically striking, that sort of takes its clues from the sort of black and white Lebanese architecture. Two important water features which help to animate the square. But again, the interesting thing about these projects is that Solidaire, as the development company, they invest in the public realm, and they invest in the public realm before the buildings that come around it. So they've acknowledged that if you create a high quality public realm, that will inspire developers then to develop the adjacent plots of land. And it just, it helps to stitch together a city in a way that I think is really quite innovative. It's not done in all cities, and they have had the foresight and the wisdom to actually recognize that there's a huge value in developing, designing well, and building public realm. Sorry, the garden project. And then I will go very quickly through, this is a project we're currently working on in Valencia. So again, keeping with the theme of water, there are these different environments from the mountain to the agricultural plain, and then down to the sea. So different qualities of water which we were trying to bring into the project. And Valencia is very special in that it's obviously on the Mediterranean, but it's also surrounded by this very fertile agricultural belt, which in the past were small holdings, small gardens, or orchard gardens, which is not to feed one family. In recent years, it has become more intensely farmed, and some of that historical character has been lost. But we were trying to bring that back in display gardens within the Central Park. I think I'm frozen again. Yeah. So you can see these different areas. This is the Albufera, which is the freshwater marsh where adjacent to the Mediterranean, which is a rice growing area, and then the Mediterranean Sea. And the site is in the middle of Valencia, on top of railway ground, where they're putting the high-speed train underground, and they freed up this section of the city, which will be a 23-hectare central park. And the concept for this was to create these a series of folds of landforms that would contain different garden spaces and contain different activities. And that bowl has its resonance in the history and culture of Valencia. And then, again, water, very important starting point for the concept. On the one side, we have a natural water system, which is a big natural lake, and on the other side, we have the urban water system, which is a big cultural water feature in front of the main cultural building. And those two systems come together to form the framework for the design of the park. And again, using landform to define those bowl shapes. And this is an image of the overall park. So we have the main connection to the city. The main train station is here. So this is the Northern Plaza, which is the gateway to the rest of the park. There's also a whole area to the south here, a new residential area that we've been developing the streetscape and public realm play space guidelines for. And then as you move through the park, this is the main north-south boulevard, which is lined with a series of palms and jacaranda trees. And then you move into this area, which is a cultural center. These are all existing buildings in this location on the site, so all the old railway sheds are being renovated and will have cultural or educational functions that work together with the landscape within the park. Some of these sheds are being rebuilt and relocated to the perimeter to free up the space within the park. But each one of them will have an activity. In this area, we have these, what we call the Huerta Gardens, which are these display gardens for the traditional orchard garden that used to be present around that agricultural plain. This is a children's play area. Rose and floral garden displays, the southern entrance of South Plaza with a series of water features, and then this is a Mediterranean display garden, a big natural lake features with aquatic planting, an amphitheater for outdoor events with a staging area here, but it's a natural amphitheater. It's raised up quite high. There's an existing substation here, so we've raised it up to be over the top of that, creating a natural amphitheater shape. And then in this area, a perfume and scent garden. So that's the aerial view, where you can see the cultural building, the Huerta garden, the children's play area. In the back here, the Mediterranean display gardens, the amphitheater, and the perfume garden. These are some of the images of the model. The main water feature in front of the cultural center, which is very active, lots of jets, big display, lots of light at night. It's where all the energy of the park is one of the main poles of attraction within the park. So each one of these spaces has a very different character and a very different use, and it's always framed by this landform, by this enclosing bowl, with a low point where we're collecting all the water and taking it all the rainwater, taking it as quickly as possible back down into the aquifer. Valencia has a very high water table, so water is not necessarily a problem, but the challenge here is in the whole recycling strategy of the water. I think I'm stuck again. So this is a view of that's the main central spine with its flowering jacaranda trees. The idea is to have many different activities off of that spine, so places where people can play, they can sit, they can rest, be under the shade of the tree. The main entry, the North Plaza, with its big water feature and gardens to the side of it, and then this is the main north-south path leading into the southern residential area. The Central Plaza, so this is the main, the low point of the site where all the paths come together in this center area. The South Plaza, where we wanted to have a lighting art feature, which would be a memory of the catenary systems and the electrification going through below ground. The natural lake with its aquatic planting, also helping to filter the water. The amphitheater space, looking through into the floral gardens. I mean, it's fantastic to be able to do a garden this big in Europe. I think we're very honored, and it's a very special thing to be able to do, because there aren't that many sites. And to have given over this whole site to a central park is fantastic. This is the perfume garden with all its scents and textures, and then again the overall view. Thank you very much. The camera's there.